Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the heart of ancient Mesopotamia. The air is dry, but it hums with the weight of ritual. Clay buildings loom over narrow streets. Somewhere in the distance, a ziggurat scrapes the sky like a dusty, stepped pyramid, while incense curls lazily out from temple doorways. You step carefully around a pile of broken bricks, pass a goat tethered to a fig tree, and follow the sound of water, soft, rhythmic, maddeningly precise. Drip, drip, drip. You're not here for battle tales or kingly conquests. No flaming chariots. No blood-soaked scrolls. You're here for jars. Specifically, jars that tell time, Babylonian clepsydras. Water clocks, if you prefer the less dramatic version. You probably won't survive ancient Babylon, by the way. The food's either barley gruel or undercooked fish. The river floods whenever it pleases, and the air smells like hot mud. But at least they knew what time it was. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, drop your location and local time in the comments. Always fun to see who else is drifting off out there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You start your walk just before dusk, along the riverbanks near the city of Babylon. The Euphrates glistens like melted copper in the twilight. The sky, a purple soup of clouds and smog, reflects faint hints of evening stars. And ahead, rising above the dense tangle of homes and shrines, is the ziggurat of Marduk, the temple observatory where tonight's story begins. A priest's apprentice meets you at the gates. His hair is oiled, his robe smells faintly of burnt cedar, and he's been awake far too long. Late again, he mutters under his breath, ushering you into a narrow stairwell that leads, upward. Babylon loves stairs. You climb, then climb more. Your calves start to regret all life choices involving ancient temples. By the time you reach the top, the sun has melted into the horizon, and the stars begin to poke through. The platform up here is cluttered. Palm mats, broken tablets, bowls of crushed herbs, and, front and center, a squat, unremarkable jar. It burbles, drips, doesn't look magical. In fact, it kind of looks like a planter from a discount garden shop. But this is your first clepsydra, a water clock, and it's going to quietly rule the night. Behind you, the head astronomer priest appears with a sleepy nod. His beard is geometrically impressive. His hands are stained with ink and oil. We read the heavens, he says, but we keep the hours with clay. And so, you settle in for your first Babylonian all-nighter. The stars above are crisp and wheeling, and the jar at your feet gurgles like it knows secrets. There's something oddly soothing about it. You don't have a wristwatch, a phone, or even a sun to glance at. Just a dripping pot and a man who knows which planet rises next. Around you, other apprentices scurry about. One lights a brazier. Another adjusts the angle of a bronze rod mounted on a stand. It's not a telescope, exactly, but it does help line up stars on the horizon. There's a faint hum of chanting coming from a nearby tower. Welcome to the ancient world's most sacred sleepover. As the night deepens, you begin to notice the rhythm. Not just the water, but the movement of the team. Every drip marks a unit. Every unit, a moment. A scribe periodically squats beside the jar, checking the rising water line against marks on the inner wall. One mark down? That's a quarter hour. Another? Half an hour. It's like the world's slowest, wettest stopwatch. The air cools. Crickets, or whatever the Mesopotamian version of crickets were, begin their soft chorus. Occasionally, someone notes a constellation on a clay tablet, pressing symbols with a stylus that looks suspiciously like a chicken bone. There's no urgency, no alerts, no blinking, just the unhurried art of watching things happen. In the distance, the city sighs into sleep. You hear a final cart clatter past the market. A baby wails. A dog barks at something invisible, as dogs do in every century. But up here, the quiet holds. You ask the astronomer, half joking, how people told time before the clepsydra. He gives you a long look, as if the question itself is exhausting. The sun, he finally says, and the shadows, and our bones. You nod like that made sense. Down by your feet, the jar keeps dripping. The small, maybe the size of a wide soup bowl. A tiny hole near the base lets water escape at a controlled pace. The rate is slow, just enough for a gradual rise in the outer bowl. Marks inside were scratched with a reed. Calibration, trial and error. Mostly error. You lie back. The stars are brighter now. You recognize Orion, though here it has a different name. The Sumerians called it the true shepherd of the sky, which is honestly a better name. A breeze rustles the reeds below. Somewhere, an owl hoots in the void. And still, the jar drips. It's oddly hypnotic, like a ticking clock, but damp. You can see why they used it, not just to measure hours but to anchor rituals, prayers, offerings. The gods may live in the sky, but they still expect you to be on time. A thought strikes you. How often did someone oversleep and blame a cracked jar? You imagine a panicked apprentice running into a temple late. Sorry, my lord, but the jar was clogged by frog eggs. It happens. The priest snores lightly beside you. Even the stars look like they're blinking slower. Drip, drip, drip. Time passes whether or not you notice. You recognize Orion, or at least Babylon's version of Orion, which they call the true shepherd of Anu. It's less of a hunter and more of a celestial manager, herding stars like sheep across the heavens. Babylonian constellations are poetic like that. You squint upward, half tempted to make up your own. The astronomer priest beside you clears his throat and points a weathered finger toward a star near the horizon. That one, he says, tells us when the barley must be sown. His tone is reverent. And that one, he gestures again, warns us when the river will rise. It turns out this whole star-watching business isn't just a mystical hobby. It's practical. Desperately practical. Babylon isn't just a city of thinkers, it's a city that has to survive harvests, taxes, royal decrees, flood seasons, omens from above. And all of that depends on knowing exactly when things will happen. Which is where timekeeping comes in. You watch as a young apprentice pours more water into the clepsydra, careful not to disturb its flow. This jar, the astronomer says, is how we know when a ritual must begin. The gods are precise. They do not attend late offerings. You nod slowly, now understanding that timing in Babylon isn't about catching a bus, it's about aligning with divine forces. Miss a star's rising by a few minutes? You might doom the king's next campaign. Forget to offer the right incense at the right hour? The gods may respond with a sandstorm. Or worse, a fiscal audit. You glance around the temple roof, noticing now that there are multiple jars, some taller, some wider, all subtly different. Each one has a purpose. Some measure daytime hours, others nighttime. Some are marked for seasonal shifts. And others, you suspect, are for rituals you're probably not authorized to know about. Below you, the city begins to stir again. Babylon doesn't sleep through the night. Too many people. Too many rituals. Too many goats escaping their pens. You hear footsteps and the clang of a gate being shut. A second astronomer joins you, a younger man with ink-stained hands and the aura of someone who's read every clay tablet twice. He carries a thin strip of baked clay, a tablet fragment etched with lists of numbers and symbols. He sits beside you and unfurls a scroll covered in neat cuneiform. Time, he says in a sleepy voice, is how we remember what the gods have done before, and how we prepare for what they'll do again. This is a society built on cycles. Sunrise, sunset. Moonrise, moonset. River rise, river flood. Festival, fast. Everything depends on recognizing patterns, and those patterns depend on tracking time. The clepsydra, humble and drippy as it is, becomes a kind of cosmic translator. There's a soft chuckle from behind you, one of the older priests muttering to himself as he corrects a clay tablet. Told them last week the eclipse was on the wrong day. Nobody listens to old men until the moon goes missing. You smile. The vibe here is less ominous than you expected. Yes, it's religious. Yes, it's serious. But there's also a sleepy camaraderie to it, like being on a night shift with people who've worked the same job for 20 years. You ask why they use water of all things. Why not fire? Or sand? Or, just looking at the stars? The young astronomer shrugs. Water never forgets. It moves the same way every time if you know how to listen. You eye the jar again. It is, in fact, still dripping. Perfectly. No rush. No pause. Just one drop, then another, then another. And then another layer clicks into place. Babylon's gods weren't just watching from above, they were believed to live in rhythms. Rhythms in time, rhythms in space. Measuring time wasn't separate from worship, it was the worship. You glance over to a trio of apprentices organizing a tray of miniature figurines, tiny carved models of deities, each to be blessed at a specific hour. The timing of their blessing depends on, of course, the water jar. One apprentice consults a water line. Another looks at the stars. The third tries to wipe bird droppings off one of the figurines. You step back to the edge of the platform and peer over. Babylon stretches beneath you like a worn carpet. Flat roofs, mud-brick courtyards, the odd palm tree growing stubbornly in a pot too small for it. Smoke rises from cook fires. A temple drum beats faintly from the district across the river. Suddenly, the priest claps his hands. It's time, he says. Not the time. Just time. You don't ask what it's time for. You just follow. You're led to a narrow chamber just below the observatory. Inside, a second clepsydra is gurgling quietly, its outer bowl lined with wax to prevent water absorption because, apparently, wet clay likes to drink. The bowl's markings are cleaner here, carved more precisely. This is the official jar. The one they trust. The astronomer lights a shallow dish of oil. He chants softly. A thin trail of smoke curls toward the ceiling. He bows once, then pours a tiny bit of water from the jar into a separate dish, symbolic time captured for the gods. You don't understand the full meaning. But you do feel something. Not mystical, exactly. Just quiet. Intentional. As though this entire society is whispering the hours into being, drop by drop. You glance at the jar again. Still dripping. Still exact. Still gently ruling the sacred world. Smoke rises, curling upward like a lazy serpent. The chant isn't loud or theatrical, it's soft, almost like a lullaby. You listen as the syllables melt together, unfamiliar yet oddly soothing. It's a prayer to Nabu, god of wisdom, writing, and scribes, a deity who no doubt appreciates punctuality. You glance again at the clepsydra. The waterline has dipped just past the second notch. The priest pauses mid-chant and nods. Right on cue. He continues. You're beginning to realize the water jar is more than a tool. It's a metronome for the cosmos. A slow, sleepy heartbeat that keeps the city in step with divine rhythm. Even as donkeys bray outside and someone drops a basket of lentils in the courtyard below, inside this room, time itself is contained in a drip. Outside, a bell rings, deep, metallic, slightly cracked. That's not an alarm. It's the signal for another temple to begin its pre-dawn fire ritual. Somewhere, another clepsydra has just reached its mark. You imagine a chain reaction of sleepy apprentices all over the city shuffling around with oil lamps and clay bowls all timed by water. You are in a city held together by jars. The younger priest smiles, seeing your dazed expression. We used to rely only on the stars, he says. But clouds do what they want. Water doesn't lie unless someone fills it too quickly. You raise an eyebrow. That happens often? He chuckles. It's usually goats. You try not to laugh, but the idea of a sacred timekeeping system being thrown off by an overenthusiastic goat is, well, very human. The priest waves you toward a wooden bench. You sit. He brings over a clay tablet, still damp with fresh inscriptions. We're recording eclipse cycles, he says. The Saros cycle. We've tracked them for generations. You blink. You've heard the term before, maybe in a documentary with soothing flute music. The Saros cycle, roughly 18 years, used to predict solar and lunar eclipses. And here you are, watching it carved in real time by lamplight with fingers still smudged in clay. He shows you a column of numbers, each one carefully measured to correspond with time intervals, moon phases, water flow. It's math, yes, but it's also a kind of poetry. Time is a relationship between dripping water and dancing moonlight. You learn that Babylonian astronomers use both sidereal and synodic months. One tracks the moon relative to the stars, the other to the sun. They also divide the day into 12 double hours, matching their base, 60 number system. 60 being a number of divine symmetry. Why 60? Because it divides evenly by 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. A math teacher's dream. Or nightmare, depending on your temperament. Even today, you use this ancient logic every time you look at a clock. Minutes? Seconds? Thank Babylon. Or curse them. Depends on your Monday morning. You step closer to the clepsydra again. How do you know it's accurate? You ask. The older priest joins in, stroking his beard as though summoning wisdom from the ends of it. We tested against the stars. Against shadow lengths. Against shadow dogs. You pause. Shadow dogs? Ah, you don't have those? He grins. That's what we call the dark patch the sundial casts before midday. Looks like a little tail? You try to picture it. A sundial's shadow wagging like a sleepy pup. Babylon may be ancient, but it's not humorless. The room grows quieter. Outside, the first hint of pale gold slips above the eastern horizon. Morning. Stillness. The older priest dips a reed pen into ink and draws a line across the clay. Time is always flowing, he murmurs, but here we slow it down. We catch it one drop at a time. You think about your own clock back home, digital, glowing, relentlessly precise. No dripping. No stars. No prayers to keep it running. You wonder if anything that mechanical could ever feel this human. The priests move to the window and bow their heads slightly. The sun crests the rooftops. Light strikes the ziggurat's highest bricks. Someone across the river begins singing a hymn to Shamash, the sun god. Another day begins right on time. The astronomers begin cleaning up. The tablet is set to dry. The oil lamp is extinguished. A new water jar is prepared for the next watch. You follow them back out onto the roof. The city is properly awake now. Merchants haul baskets to market. Children race around corners. A rooster somewhere refuses to stop shouting. Babylon, golden and buzzing, unfolds like parchment across the plains. You blink slowly. You're tired. But not the usual tired. You've slipped into a gentler pace. A rhythm not of minutes and seconds, but of stars and jars. And just as you're about to head down, one of the apprentices calls after you. Hey, if you see the goat that messed with the west jar last night, kick it for me. You grin and nod solemnly. I'll make it pay in barley. He gives you a thumbs up. Sacred vengeance, Babylon style. As you descend the stairs, your mind drifts again. Time, water, stars. And goats. Always goats. You descend the narrow steps from the temple rooftop, the scent of burned cedar and lamp oil still clinging to your robes. The clay beneath your sandals is warm already, baked by yesterday's sun, and the alleys of Babylon wind around you like a labyrinth made of dreams. You walk slowly because there's no rush in this version of time. Not here. Not when the whole city pulses to the rhythm of dripping water and patient stars. You pause near a small courtyard where a woman is spreading damp linen across flat stones. The fabric smells of rosewater and river silt. A child sits nearby playing with a clay figurine, an oddly shaped lion with wings, like the ones carved into palace walls. You watch as she lines up pebbles beside it. 1, 2, 3, then back again. An accidental counting system. You're beginning to notice how obsessed Babylon is with measurement. Pebbles, stars, drops. Everything gets counted. And somewhere in the back of your head, a sleepy narrator voice whispers, and this is how you fell asleep learning ancient time theory. You cross a small bridge, and there it is again, a clepsydra. This one is simpler, just a ceramic bowl with a narrow spout at the bottom suspended over a second jar. It sits outside a scribe's house, and next to it, a wax tablet scratched with tiny marks. The scribe is young, maybe 15. He's chewing on a date pit and glancing between the dripping water and the sky like he's waiting for a secret to be revealed. He notices you watching and gives a sheepish grin. I'm trying to predict market flow, he says. See if time changes when my dad sells figs instead of onions. You nod solemnly. That's exactly what I would be doing. He shows you his notes. Primitive as they are, they resemble a kind of proto-statistics. Hourly watermarks compared to profit notations. Even at the scale, time is being harvested for patterns. Babylon doesn't just tell time, it studies how time behaves. You keep walking. A vendor calls out, hawking lemon mint barley drink, good for the midday slump, which you suspect is Babylonian for iced coffee, 1200 BC edition. You buy one, just for the experience, and the vendor uses a sundial made of bone to check the hour. You squint at it, unsure how to read it. He shrugs. If the shadow reaches the turtle, you're late for lunch. The sundial has animal markers, beetle, turtle, fox, and owl. You wonder if anyone actually understands it or if they're just too proud to admit they don't. A time-honored tradition in every era. You duck into a small public square. A young astronomer stands beside a map carved into a stone slab. She's tracing the curve of a constellation with her finger. You ask her what she's doing. She explains that they're testing a new method of dividing the sky into 12 parts. The heavens move like a wheel, she says. And if we can align the star paths with our water clocks, we'll know exactly when to plant, when to pray, and when to nap. You raise an eyebrow at that last one. She laughs. Yes, rest is a sacred rhythm too. You sit beside her and ask about the biggest challenge in their timekeeping. She thinks for a moment, brushing wind-blown sand from the map. It's the drip, she says. If the hole is too wide, time flows too fast. Too narrow, and it clogs. You have to find the perfect balance. It's not just math. It's listening. You let that linger. It's not just math. It's listening. You're starting to feel like time itself is a character in Babylon. Not a tyrant with a stopwatch, but a gentle creature who lives in jars and glows in the sky. You follow it around all day, trying to understand its moods. Back in the temple compound, you peek into a side room. A collection of clepsydras of all shapes and sizes lines the walls, some made of bronze, others of carved stone. One has little figurines molded into its sides, a moon, a fish, a sleeping man with exaggerated ears. That one, says a voice beside you, is for measuring dreams. You turn. It's the older priest from earlier holding a small box of incense. He explains, with a perfectly straight face, that some Babylonians believed you could track which hours of the night produced different kinds of dreams. They'd record these with the clepsydra waking gently at pre-measured intervals. You ask, so, kind of like sleep cycles? Exactly, he says. Except ours involved fewer alarm clocks and more divine intervention. You take a seat beside the dream clock. The priest lights the incense. You watch the smoke curl around the figurines and then disappear upward as if vanishing into the unseen hours. There is something heartbreakingly beautiful about a civilization that believes dreams arrive on a schedule. That if you understand water and stars well enough, you could time the arrival of visions. You reach out and touch the clepsydra's rim. It's cool and slightly damp. Do you believe it worked? You ask. The priest tilts his head. Doesn't everything work if enough people agree it does? Fair enough. You close your eyes for a moment, lulled by the steady drip, drip, drip. You imagine the hours pooling below your feet. Liquid time softly counting itself without fuss or demand. And in the distance, another bell rings. You leave the dream clock behind with a kind of reverence, like you've glimpsed something sacred in a puddle of dripping clay and whispered belief. Outside, the sky is shifting, turning that soft shade of sandstone pink that means evening is thinking about arriving, but hasn't committed yet. You follow the sound of music, low, rhythmic, sleepy. A pair of street performers are setting up near the riverbank. A reed flute player and a woman with a drum made from stretched fish skin. They play in time with the drip of a nearby clepsydra, their tempo slow and steady, as if matching the city's heartbeat. As you sit and listen, the wind carries over the gentle gurgle of the Euphrates, and it's here you really begin to understand something. Babylon doesn't just measure time, it expresses it. In rhythm, in architecture, in shadows, in dreams, in sound. You notice, again, one of those slender temple boys, barefoot, sun-darkened, carrying a jar that's been sealed with wax. He approaches the musicians and carefully sets it beside them. A clepsydra, of course. Marked for ritual music, perhaps? Or maybe he's just keeping track of how long they've been out here performing. You can't tell where utility ends and ritual begins anymore, and honestly, that's part of the charm. The flute player nods at you mid-breath and keeps playing. You recognize the melody. It's based on one of the oldest recorded scales in human history, etched into a cuneiform tablet called the Hurrian hymn. A real artifact, by the way, dated to around 1400 BCE. But here, in this moment, it feels contemporary, natural, as though time, music, and myth have all flattened into a gentle harmony. You turn away from the performance and begin wandering through the older part of the city, the one that predates Hammurabi's code, where bricks are crumbling and the alleys are quieter. Here, timekeeping is rougher, less scientific. A woman tends a lantern, checking the angle of its wick, her version of a clock. Across the lane, a boy tosses marked stones at a wall, trying to predict where they'll land. His own private divination. Not everyone has a clepsydra here. They rely on shadows, sounds, gut instinct. Yet their day still ticks by in a kind of shared agreement. You find a man seated outside his doorway, carving symbols into a broken tablet. He invites you to sit, and when you do, he explains he's reconstructing a family record. We used to mark births and deaths by star patterns, he says. But now the temple wants hours and dates. He sighs. It feels less poetic. You nod in sympathy, but he chuckles after a moment. Still, it's easier for birthday parties. As he carves, he shares that his grandfather told him stories about when Babylon didn't use water clocks at all. Back then, time was in the hands of the gods, he says. You waited for omens, thunderclaps, the cry of a heron. If you were lucky, maybe a priest interpreted your shadow. He leans in. But we weren't lucky. We mostly guessed. It strikes you that the clepsydra is part of a larger cultural shift. a move from divine time to human time, from mystery to math. The jar of dripping water is a claim. We, the humans, can measure this thing that used to belong only to the heavens. You thank the old man and keep walking. Soon, you find yourself standing before the great ziggurat again. Its shadow has lengthened across the plaza, touching the threshold of a small garden where priests grow herbs for medicine and incense. The ziggurat's sides glow gold in the sunset light, and you're struck by how much it resembles a staircase to nowhere. Just a series of steps, each one narrowing toward the top, vanishing into sky. It reminds you of the clepsydra again. Wide at the top, narrowing below. One shape reflecting another. Pattern. A quiet echo of purpose. You wander into the herb garden. A novice priest is pruning blue fenugreek with a tiny obsidian blade. He gestures toward a gourd-shaped clepsydra tucked under a pomegranate tree. That one tells us when to harvest, he explains. The trick is to water the roots while the jar empties. When the last drop falls, the herbs are at their sweetest. You blink. You time your watering with a clock? He shrugs. The plants like it. We like the plants. So it works. Time in Babylon is not a tyrant. It's a companion. A quiet presence that helps things grow. Helps people rest. Helps dreams arrive when they're ready. You lie down beneath the tree, just for a moment. The ground is warm. The grass is soft. The air smells like crushed thyme and river stone. You close your eyes. For a second, you imagine your own internal clepsydra. Ticking away, drip by drip, calming your thoughts. The flute music still drifts through the streets, and you imagine it syncing with the stars, with the jars, with the heartbeats of every animal in Babylon. A drip, a breath, a breeze, and time flows on. You stir from your nap beneath the pomegranate tree, not entirely sure how long you've been out. But here, that feels less like a question and more like a feature of the environment. Time in Babylon doesn't rush. It's more like a river current, gentle, consistent, easy to float in. You sit up slowly, brushing dried leaves from your robe. Well, in this story, you wear a robe and re-enter the winding paths of the city. This time, your feet carry you toward the library quarter. Not the royal one filled with clay tablets and gatekeepers, but the quieter scribal schools, tucked behind a copper merchant's stall and shaded by date palms. Inside one modest courtyard, rows of young students kneel over clay tablets, styluses in hand, copying out lists. Long lists, star names, city names, temple inventories, tax receipts, and, you squint, yes, timekeeping records. One boy is scribbling a series of symbols next to hour markers. You ask the teacher what they're working on. Water flow calculations, he replies with a yawn. We're estimating how long a standard jar takes to empty, season by season. In summer, it's faster. Evaporation, you know. You glance around at the tablets. Each student's work looks different, and you realize something subtle but profound. There's no single clepsydra design. Each temple, each household, even each scribe might build one slightly differently. The shape of the jar, the size of the hole, the markings inside, it all varies. And yet, the Babylonians have systems to deal with that. They account for variances. They calibrate. They standardize to the best of their ability, but never assume perfection. In a way, it's more honest than some modern clocks. They accept the drift. They factor in the wiggle room. You kind of admire that. The teacher explains that advanced students eventually learn to create seasonal corrections, adjustments to the flow rate depending on humidity, temperature, and even altitude. It's not perfect, he says, but we do our best. It helps priests chant on schedule. Farmers plant by it. And, he adds with a smirk, it stops temple cooks from burning the lentils. You imagine a priest squinting into a clepsydra while stirring a pot, muttering, 2 more drips, then add the cumin. You laugh softly. The teacher doesn't seem to mind. As you watch the students work, you notice something else. They're not just learning to measure time, they're learning to predict it, to forecast star risings, to track the moon's phases, to say with some certainty when the next equinox will fall, or how long until the river floods. This isn't just for daily routines. It's for rituals, For legitimacy, kings need to predict eclipses to claim divine favor. Priests must know when to perform sacrifices. Farmers, of course, need to know when to dig and when to rest. In Babylon, time is not just measured, it's political, religious, economic. The water jar isn't just a timer. It's a power tool. You thank the teacher and continue deeper into the city, past stone gutters that carry away waste and rain. You spot another clepsydra, this one in a public square, surrounded by low benches. A young woman tends it with care, tilting the vessel to reset its flow. "It's for debates," she says, catching your curious look. Each speaker gets 1 jar's worth. A clepsydra for public speaking? Of course. The original, "Your time is up." You ask what happens if someone runs over. "We dump a second jar over their head," she deadpans, then smiles. "Kidding. We just start coughing until they stop." Time as social courtesy. Time as shared structure. In Babylon, even arguments are gently hydrologic. She offers you a seat, and for a few minutes, you listen as a pair of elders debate whether barley yields were better under King Samsuiluna or his grandson. The arguments are low stakes, the audience half dozing, the sun warm against your shoulders. When the water runs out, so does the speaker's time. The clepsydra burbles a soft final drip, and the elder bows his head, yielding the floor. No gongs, no timers, just gravity and patience. You rise again, feeling the heat ebbing from the day. Babylon is transitioning, markets closing, fires being lit, evening prayers beginning. You follow a narrow alley toward the temple district. A family is seated around a clepsydra, watching the shadows lengthen. A boy tosses dates into a bowl each time the jar drips. His own quiet ritual. The dog at his feet twitches in its sleep. Above you, the ziggurat glows in the golden hour. Light hits the top tier just so, and for a second it looks like the structure is aflame. Time stretches. You reach a small shrine carved into the wall, dedicated not to a major god, but to Nisaba, the goddess of writing, wisdom, and accounting. Her statue is small, serene, holding a stylus in one hand, a measuring cup in the other. You kneel for a moment, just because. You're not sure what you believe, but it feels right. This whole city breathes in rhythm, like a body. It exhales through water jars and star charts. It inhales through chants and lullabies. From behind the shrine, a low chime sounds. A bowl of water has filled. Another clepsydra, but inverted. This one measures not how long something lasts, but how long it takes to arrive. A drip, another, always forward. In time. Not time as a prison, but time as rhythm. Like a heartbeat. Like footsteps on clay. Like water flowing, steady and measured, yet never exactly the same. You rise slowly from the shrine and decide to climb the ziggurat before the light fully fades. The steps are wide and shallow, designed for rituals and processions, not sprinting. Which suits you just fine. Each step carries you a little higher above the noise and smells of the street until the city seems like a calm mosaic below. At the top platform, the view is still. Not breathtaking in a postcard kind of way, just deeply peaceful. The Euphrates snakes off to the west, catching the last bits of sunlight in its lazy bends. You lean on the baked brick parapet and glance around. A priest in indigo robes stands nearby, arms folded behind his back, also watching the horizon. He nods at you, then points east. "The moonrise," he says simply. You turn and sure enough, there it is, silver and smooth, just breaching the distant ridgeline. You both watch in silence as it creeps upward. Then he chuckles softly and mutters, 3 drips late. The jar is jealous of the sky again. You laugh, unsure if he's being serious, but he doesn't clarify. Instead, he reaches into a small wooden chest and pulls out a tiny clay tablet. On it, lines and notches. He points to one in particular. "This mark," he explains, "tells me how long the moon took to rise after sunset this time last year. We used the water clock to track the delay. And the stars, of course. So they weren't just recording the present, they were logging the past. Looking for patterns. For signs. You'd assumed the clepsydra was all about immediacy, but now you understand it was also about memory. You ask if they ever make predictions. "Oh, certainly," he says. "We know the moon will rise later tomorrow. And the next day. Then earlier again. Cycles within cycles. All recorded." You peer at the stars just starting to appear. One catches your eye, bright, steady. Is that serious? You ask, remembering some fragment from school or some documentary with British narration and flute music. He smiles. We call it mulkk.si.di. Yes, serious. Its heliacal rising tells us the seasons are shifting. The Nile floods when it appears. Not here, of course. But we watch it anyway. This is what strikes you most about Babylon, its blend of precision and poetry. They don't just say that star means harvest. They say that star is rising wet with tears and fire, so prepare your hands for the grain. It's beautiful. And useful. And oddly calming. The priest tells you that the temple clepsydra is recalibrated monthly. Not just to account for wear, but to ensure it matches the movements of the stars and the priest's chants. A misaligned jar means a misaligned ritual. And that, he adds dryly, leads to annoyed gods and bad lentils. You've now heard lentils invoked twice in relation to temporal catastrophe, which is starting to feel suspicious. You file this away in your ancient culinary warnings mental drawer. As the stars spread like freckles across the sky, the priest excuses himself. He has charts to complete, and besides, the wind is picking up. You linger a moment longer, then descend the ziggurat slowly, one wide brick step at a time. Back at ground level, the city has shifted. Fires flicker in braziers. People move more slowly. You pass a man setting up a small stall selling sesame cakes, it seems. A group of children run by, laughing, chasing some poor dog with a clay doll tied to its back. You hope it's consensual. You stop outside a house where a man is marking the passage of time with singing. You listen. A low rhythmic chant. Not a song of joy or sorrow, but something methodical. Almost a metronome made of vowels. He sees you and smiles. This is my family's timer, he explains. We sing 1 verse for washing. 2 verses for boiling. 10 verses if my wife is angry. You grin. Of course. Not everyone has a water jar. Not every family can afford it or wants one. But everyone finds a way to measure time. Some sing. Some count beads. Some use the stars. You feel a strange comfort in this, that even in a world without digital clocks, time doesn't vanish. It just finds other containers. You walk along a canal now, its water dark and slow. The moon reflects off it like a second clepsydra, its ripples a kind of ticking. You remember the priest's words, cycles within cycles. Maybe that's the real trick of Babylonian timekeeping, it doesn't pretend to be fixed. It admits drift. It embraces seasonal changes. And yet, through patient recording, through observation and recalibration, it manages to build a rhythm people can live by. You pass a couple seated under an awning, whispering as they pass a jar back and forth. You're not sure if it's wine or water or both. Either way, time trickles. The night deepens. And still, the jars drip. Somewhere behind you, the temple bell thuds once. Not to mark an hour, but a prayer. A pause. A breath. And as the city softens into sleep, you realize you haven't checked a clock in ages. Not even in your mind. No counting seconds. No mental math. Just water. Just rhythm. Just now. You hear the distant sound of a reed flute. A few uncertain notes, then a melody that loops gently like a cradle song. It's the kind of music that doesn't announce itself, it simply settles in the air like dust or moonlight. You pause by the canal, its banks lit by the glow of a nearby oil lamp hanging from a fig tree. The flame wobbles in the warm night breeze, casting shadows that look suspiciously like dancing cats. Or maybe that's just your brain finally relaxing. Across the water, a man in a long linen tunic is pouring something carefully into a basin. His movements are slow, deliberate, almost ceremonial. When you squint, you realize it's another clepsydra. Smaller than the ones in the temple, but clearly the same principle. You cross the narrow footbridge to get a closer look. The man notices you but doesn't seem surprised. Maybe he's used to people being curious about his sleepy little setup. He gestures toward the jar with pride. This is my night clock, he says. Not temple work, this one keeps my bakery on schedule. You blink. A water clock for a bakery? Of course, he continues. If the loaves sit too long, they dry out. Not long enough and the dough won't rise. I time the proofing with the jar. He taps it affectionately. She's more consistent than my nephew. You smile. There's something wholesome about this, the idea that a timekeeping technology used to map the heavens is also trusted to manage bread dough. You ask how it works without sunlight. Simple, he shrugs. I fill it at the same level every night after sunset. I marked the basin with tiny notches for each phase, mix, knead, rest, bake. I know when to move on by the water level. And it hits you again, the Babylonian clepsydra isn't just about tracking time like a stopwatch. It's more like a ritual assistant. A quiet partner. One drip at a time, it helps shape the rhythm of daily life, from sacred rituals to sesame rolls. The baker shows you his notched basin. This one's for mixing, he says, pointing to a faint groove, and this one's the end of first proof. Second proof takes longer, it reaches here. You ask what happens if he oversleeps. He laughs. That's why I built a second jar with a whistle inside. You raise an eyebrow. When the water drains far enough, the float inside sinks and pushes air through a reed, he explains. Makes a high sound like a goose having opinions. You both laugh. A clepsydra alarm clock. Babylon really did think of everything. Then he invites you to sit, and without thinking too hard, you do. He hands you a figure. It's warm from the air, soft and sweet. The flute continues its lazy tune in the distance. He talks about how his father used to bake in the same spot using the same jar. How the timing was passed down like a secret recipe. We say bread is born in silence, he tells you. Too many words spoil the rise. And now the silence stretches comfortably between you, broken only by the soft gurgle of the jar and the occasional rustle of leaves. You watch the water slip slowly past the notches in the basin. Drip, drip, drip. It feels like nothing is happening. And yet, the dough is rising. The stars are moving. The world is gently, stubbornly continuing its turn. Eventually, you thank the baker and rise, walking slowly through the now nearly empty streets. Lamps burn low in windows. Dogs snore under woven mats. Somewhere, a woman sings a lullaby to a baby who has absolutely no interest in sleeping. You pass a school, its clay walls cooling in the night air. A small inscription near the doorway catches your eye. You lean closer and make out the cuneiform characters, not that you can read them, but you recognize the shape. The priest earlier said they often wrote water clock tables for students to copy. Inside, you imagine rows of tired children hunched over clay tablets, carving number after number with a stylus. Learning how many drips per cubit. How to adjust for different jar sizes. What to do if your uncle kicks the jar over during a goat emergency. You chuckle softly. Timekeeping wasn't just divine, it was homework. You keep walking past a square where a few elders sit in the shadows, sharing stories. One of them is explaining how they once measured rainfall with a jar similar to the clepsydra. Another remembers a time when the king ordered time be kept with candles, not water, for 1 whole week, and it went very poorly. A third man mutters, candles melt faster when you're nervous. The others nod solemnly. They invite you to sit, and though your legs protest, your curiosity wins. One of them begins to tell a story about a festival where all the city's clocks, every jar, bowl, and basin were synchronized to the priest's signal at dawn. For once, all the bread came out right, he says with a wink. It's such a simple image. A whole city unified by dripping water. Not bells. Not trumpets. Not commands. Just the soft, invisible motion of time. Eventually, you take your leave. One of the elders waves lazily. Don't forget to wind your jar, he jokes. You promise you will. The walk back to your lodging is quiet. The kind of quiet that settles not just around you but inside you. Even your thoughts seem to slow, lining up single file to take turns. You pass the same canal, now nearly still. The moon, higher now, casts a wide stripe of silver across it, like a path only dreams can walk. And through it all, the dripping continues. I lead you with the kind of gesture that says, we've all been up too long. You smile, nod in agreement, and quietly slip back into the sleepy lanes of Babylon. The city feels like it's tucking itself in now. The wind picks up, gentle and warm, carrying with it the mingled scents of baked grain, sweet oil, and a faint whiff of river mud. You step carefully around a cat sprawled across the road like it owns the kingdom, and let's face it, it probably does. You wander, not really looking for anything, until you find yourself near the riverbank. The Euphrates glides past like liquid silk, slow and patient. You notice a wooden structure just over the slope, a small riverside hut open on 3 sides, dimly lit with a single swinging lamp. And inside it, someone's awake. You creep a little closer. The man inside isn't a priest or a baker. He wears a worker's robe dyed faintly blue. His fingers are stained with ink and clay smudges trail up his forearms. He's scribbling into a slab of wet clay with rhythmic confidence, pausing now and then to glance at a clepsydra. Of course. It's smaller than the temple ones, but it's unmistakable, a narrow-necked jar with water slowly trickling out into a marked bowl. He's watching it carefully, timing each segment of his work to precise intervals. You clear your throat gently and he looks up. Ah! Another late-night thinker, he says without alarm. You gesture toward the tablet, curious. He chuckles and turns it slightly so you can peek. It's a list of tasks, he explains. Each one gets 2 fingerwidths of time. Maybe 3 if I'm distracted. You ask if he's writing letters. No, he smiles. I copy court records. Land boundaries, tax tallies, goat disputes, real edge-of-your-mat stuff. But it has to be perfect. You wonder why he uses a clepsydra for such mundane work. It keeps me from rushing, he explains. If I hurry and make a mistake, someone might lose a plot of land or worse, get 2 goats when they only asked for 1. You sit beside him, watching the water level inch downward as he writes. The room is filled with small sounds, the scratch of stylus on clay, the subtle splash of each droplet, and the occasional groan of the river's wooden supports. He points to the bowl. That notch right there means I've got just enough time left to do 1 more line. He carves with quiet precision. You stare at the cuneiform, so intricate and purposeful. You know, he says, we used to measure only big moments. Sunrises, moons, eclipses. But now we measure, well, this. He holds up the damp slab. Tiny goat disagreements. He laughs at his own observation, then shrugs. But I think that's good. Time should belong to everyone. Not just priests and kings. You find that rather profound. Time doesn't need a throne. Sometimes it just needs a place at the desk. As the water slips closer to the next notch, he stands and stretches. Shift's done, he sighs. I'll fire these in the morning. You thank him and step back into the night, where the sounds of the city are now barely more than a whisper. Wandering again, you come across an open courtyard. A small group sits on a low platform, speaking softly. One of them is teaching her daughter how to read a shadow dial, a kind of sundial used when water clocks aren't practical. The child points with excitement, then disappointment as the shadows barely move. It's too dark, she frowns. Her mother laughs. That's why we use jars at night. You think back to everything you've seen tonight, the temples, the baker, the scribe, the quiet girl watching stars reflect in the water, and you realize something. The clepsydra isn't just a clock. It's an invitation to be present. There's no ticking. No alarms. No pressure. Just steady, deliberate time. Time you can feel. And here in Babylon, that feeling touches everything. Back on the main road, you pass a merchant packing his stall with leftover lentils and saffron. He's humming softly, unaware of you. You catch sight of a tiny clepsydra on his counter, a travel-sized one, no doubt. It looks a little crooked, maybe cracked. But it worked well enough to get him through the market day. A few steps more, and the temple looms ahead again, silent now. But somehow still awake. The moon sits heavy over it all, watching like an ancient friend. The thought crosses your mind, what would the gods make of this? The quiet clocks? The goat disputes? The bakery whistles? Probably nothing. Or maybe everything. Because even gods, you suspect, appreciate a well-risen loaf and a stargazer who knows when to blink. You sit down one last time near the edge of the temple garden where water spills gently from a stone lion's mouth into a narrow channel. You lean back against the warm brick and close your eyes. Somewhere behind you, a clepsydra drips. Each drop stretches like a long breath. Not fast. Not slow. Just time. As it was meant to be. Brick wall, your head tilted toward the stars, and let your body finally relax. Babylon has slowed to a hush, and the gentle splash of the water, steady and predictable, acts as your lullaby now. You hear footsteps. Not hurried ones. Just the deliberate shuffle of sandaled feet on stone. You glance over to see an older man, hunched but strong, carrying a wide basin filled with dry reeds and a couple of wax-sealed scrolls. He settles near the edge of the courtyard, nods politely to you, and starts arranging the materials. Naturally, your curiosity gets the better of your tiredness. You wander over, careful not to intrude. He gestures you closer anyway. You're up late, he says, smiling beneath a shock of white hair. You tell him you've been exploring the city's timekeepers. Ah, he nods, pulling out a small copper pot, setting it upright beside a long-handled ladle. Then you've seen the priest clocks. Those are for looking skyward. He taps his temple. This one's for looking inward. You ask what it is. A water jar, he says with a twinkle in his eye. But not for telling time. For deciding how to use it. Now you're definitely curious. He dips the ladle into the jar and slowly pours a small amount of water into a carved wooden bowl. A reed floats inside, bobbing gently. This is how I think. One bowl, one thought, he says. By the time the water stops moving, I either have an answer or I don't. Either way, I'm done thinking about it. You watch mesmerized. The reed trembles, circles lazily, then settles still. It's how I stop worrying, he adds quietly. You think of your own racing thoughts, the to-do lists, the strange anxieties that come out of nowhere at 3 a.m. Maybe all you need is a bowl, a reed, and permission to stop. He offers the bowl to you. You decline, but he insists. So, you take the ladle, pour, and watch the little reed dance. What are you thinking about? He asks. You tell him the truth. I'm wondering how people remembered all these ideas before paper. He chuckles. Not everything needed writing. Sometimes a water clock taught you more than a scroll ever could. That answer sinks in deep. Like the kind of wisdom you don't argue with. The wind carries the smell of baked earth and something faintly floral, maybe tamarisk. Somewhere in the distance a low drumbeat sounds. Probably a temple ceremony reaching its sleepy finale. Or someone finally finding rhythm after too much date wine. You sit there with the old man for a while, not saying much. Just listening to water ripple and reeds settle. And in that stillness, Babylon feels like it's folding around you like a blanket. Soft, warm, and timeless. Eventually, he packs up, nods his farewell, and vanishes into the night. You don't even hear his footsteps. You return to wandering. A few streets away, you pass a tall wall painted with delicate blue tiles, faint outlines of lions and bulls shimmer under moonlight. A garden lies beyond it, filled with rows of sleepy plants. In the center, a stone platform supports another clepsydra, this one cracked, its basin dry, long retired. It's more memorial than tool now. A shrine to time itself. A reminder, perhaps, that the passing of hours can be beautiful even after its purpose fades. You lean against the wall, the stone still warm from the day's heat. Somewhere nearby, a donkey brays softly and a flute carries a wandering tune from an upper balcony. As you close your eyes for a moment, you wonder how many people sat right here thousands of years ago watching the same stars, listening to the same water rhythms and quietly pondering what comes next. Not in a grand world-changing way. Just the next thing. The next task. The next goat tally. The next thought worth thinking. And maybe, like you, they wondered if time was something to chase or something to float through, like a reed on a still bowl. The clepsydras of Babylon didn't chime. They didn't ring or buzz or scream for your attention. They just emptied, slowly, drop by drop. They offered a rhythm you could ignore or follow. And somehow both felt okay. You take a long, slow breath. You can feel your heartbeat sinking with the ancient flow, soft, deliberate, calm. The sky above begins to lighten just a bit. The stars blink slower. The birds haven't stirred yet, but they will. Soon. But not just yet. You press your hand to the ground. The earth is still warm, still patient. Just like everything else in this city of quiet clocks. And as you stretch, yawn, and let yourself sink back into that dreamlike daze, a small voice in your mind whispers. Time isn't something you lose. It's something you lean into. And in Babylon, leaning into time just might be the whole point. You wake, or rather, you never quite slept, not fully. Instead, you floated somewhere between thought and dream, drifting through ancient courtyards and temple chambers, your mind lulled into stillness by dripping water and distant star charts. As the first pale glow of morning dusts the tops of the ziggurats, you find yourself standing on a wide stone terrace overlooking the Euphrates. The river is unusually quiet at this hour, as if even it respects the solemn rituals of dawn. You can see a fisherman unfurling his nets slowly, rhythmically, in perfect time with the ripples. His every movement seems to echo the language of water and time. You're not alone on the terrace. A group of young apprentices, no older than 15, shuffle into place near a polished bronze sundial embedded in the ground. A senior priest in deep blue robes steps up, nods solemnly, and raises a flat wooden board. He is holding what looks like a sheet of wax covered in shallow grooves. You lean in. It's a schedule. Before the sun climbs, he says in a low tone, we mark the intervals by shadow length. We give the day its spine. Each apprentice takes a moment to observe the sundial's shadow. Then they record its length by dripping a measured amount of oil into a marked bowl. The oil flows slowly, thicker than water, but with the same steady logic. When it reaches the final notch, the next student steps up. The timing is poetic somehow. You're watching a ballet of future scribes and sky readers, learning to capture something as slippery as daylight with tools as simple as bowls and patience. The priest speaks again, softer this time. The jar may measure the hour, but the sun gives it meaning. That's a pretty poetic line for a man with ink stains on his knees. You learn that these young students are training in the dual arts of astronomy and ritual, skills considered inseparable in Babylonian culture. To know the stars was not simply to track them, but to understand what they asked of you. Time in this world is not mechanical. It's moral, ethical, cosmic. If Jupiter rises late, you don't just adjust your clock, you consider what Jupiter might be trying to say. Did someone skip a sacred offering? Has a farmer neglected the barley fields? Is a neighbor hiding a lie? You can't help but think how exhausting modern timekeeping is in comparison. Your phone just pings you with deadlines and reminders. Babylonian time offers you riddles, symbolism, and perhaps a little existential guilt. The apprentices finish their shadow rituals and scatter like birds into various temple corridors. You follow one of them down a hall flanked by high stone walls etched with faint carvings, lunar cycles, lion hunts, and what looks like a man chasing a goat holding a clock. You blink. No, probably not. At the end of the hallway, you reach a quiet chamber. No one's in it. Just a large floor mosaic of concentric circles with a small water basin placed perfectly at the center. The water is still reflecting the geometric pattern overhead. This, you realize, is a meditation room. A chamber not for calculation, but for contemplation. You step inside and sit cross-legged near the basin. It's cooler here, darker. The stone smells faintly of myrrh and clay. You close your eyes, listening to the soft burble of another clepsydra in the adjoining chamber. Not loud enough to distract, but just enough to guide the breath. In, out. Drip. In, out. Drip. In Babylon, even time meditates. You let your mind wander back to the old man with his reed bowl, the apprentice's oil measures, the temple priest's wax board, the great ziggurat platform. Each offered a different face of time, but all of them were gentle. Quiet. Non-intrusive. Time in Babylon is a companion. Not a tyrant. You stay there longer than you mean to. When you rise, your legs are stiff, but your mind feels soft and still, like river silt after the storm. You exit the chamber and step back into sunlight. The city has woken fully now. Market stalls are blooming with linens and copper tools. Children chase each other through alleys. A woman calls out the price of figs with the practiced rhythm of a poet. You take the long route back toward the river, passing a cluster of water jars stacked neatly outside a public courtyard. One of them is dripping into a deep stone cistern. The sound is hypnotic. A woman nearby is using it to wash vegetables, and the rhythmic splashes sync perfectly with the clepsydra's tempo. Even daily chores feel metered here. Time is never wasted, but it's never rushed either. You're not checking the clock every few seconds. The clock is just there, ticking in its own language, asking for nothing, offering presence. You walk alongside the Euphrates now, and it hits you. The river, the sun, the stars, the jars, they're all clocks. Every element of Babylon has been drafted into the great conversation of time. You reach a bench beneath a fig tree and sit. The figs aren't ripe yet, but they're swelling, measuring time in their own plump way. You smile at the thought. A temple bell chimes in the distance. One long tone, then silence. Not a call to action, just an acknowledgement of the hour. You close your eyes, listening, breathing. The moment passes gently. Not a call to arms, not a summons to toil. Just a single, low, resonant tone acknowledging that another hour has passed in the long Babylonian day. You sit with it. Let the sound echo through your ribs. It doesn't demand anything from you. It simply is, like the slow drift of a cloud or the settling of dust on sun-warmed stone. You glance back toward the cluster of temples, ziggurats rising like staircases for gods, and wonder how long it took to build something so massive when the clock itself moved by water droplets and shadow lengths. Decades? Generations? A project you might never live to see complete. And yet, they built them anyway. Because here, in the world of Babylon, you begin to understand time isn't a race. It's a rhythm. A relationship. A slow dance with the cosmos, and every step, every beat, matters. You wander now through a residential quarter. The streets are narrower here, shaded by tightly packed mud brick homes. Laundry hangs like banners overhead, gently swaying in the breeze. Chickens dart between doorways. Somewhere nearby, someone is grinding grain with a soft, circular scrape, scrape, scrape. And just outside a home, a father is showing his daughter how to read the time from a household clepsydra. It's simpler than the temple models. Just a wide jar balanced on a stand with a line of notches down one side. A thin stream of water drips from a hole near the bottom, landing in a second jar below. You see the fourth notch, the father says gently. When the water reaches that, it means your uncle should be here. The girl giggles. But what if he's late? The father shrugs. Then the jar was wrong. Or maybe your uncle stopped for figs. You smile. Time, it seems, is flexible here, especially when figs are involved. This domestic version of time feels familiar. Human. The clepsydra in this home isn't about calculating eclipses or appeasing gods. It's about knowing when to expect guests, when to light the cooking fire, when to feed the goats. You start to see them everywhere now, small water clocks, repurposed bowls, even leather pouches hung from nails with tiny pinpricks to let water fall in slow, measured drops. The people of Babylon have turned time into furniture, into habit, into something you can tuck between baskets of dates or balance beside the oven. It's oddly comforting knowing that for all their star-chasing and planet mapping, the Babylonians still relied on kitchen timers made of clay and guesswork. You drift through a courtyard where elders sit in a circle, chewing on lentils and playing a slow-moving board game. One of them notices you and grins. Looking for the stars? He asks in a dusty voice. Always, you say, smiling back. He points up, not to the sky, but to a sundial mounted crookedly on the courtyard wall. They'll be there tonight, he says. Same as always. He offers you a seat, and you join them for a moment, listening to the pieces click gently on the board, watching the sunlight inch its way across the dial. One of the elders laughs and says something about how time is like soup, too hot to hold when you need it and gone the moment you let it cool. It makes no sense, and yet somehow it does. Later, as the sun begins its descent, you find yourself walking the perimeter of the city. Beyond the gates, the land stretches flat and endless, fields of barley, date palms, and the occasional lazy ox. And further beyond, sand. Just sand and heat and silence. But back here, within the city walls, water trickles through gutters. Jars are rotated, flipped, emptied, refilled. The last shadows of the day lengthen across smooth flagstones. You step into a shadowed garden tucked behind a house. A woman is tending to pomegranate trees while a jar slowly fills beside her. She doesn't seem to notice you. She hums a soft tune, ancient and tuneless, as she checks the fruit for ripeness. At some unseen signal, the shift of light, the depth of the water, she pauses and calls inside, it's nearly time. You're not sure for what, but a boy appears moments later carrying a clay tablet and a reed pen. He sits cross-legged, prepared to copy something. A story, maybe? A poem? A prayer? The woman points at the water clock. You have until the third mark. The boy nods solemnly. No timer chimes. No countdown begins. Just the patient trickle of water, soft as breath. You leave them there, one writing, one pruning, both perfectly synced to the ancient clock of dripping time. And you realize, in Babylon, time isn't separate from life. It is life. Embedded in every household, every garden, every temple, every meal. You return toward the center of the city as dusk softens the sky. The last bells toll low and slow, and lights begin to flicker in doorways and courtyards. Oil lamps lit not by schedule, but by intuition. You feel sleepy. Not tired, exactly, but softened. Smoothed out. Like a stone left too long in the river's gentle pull. You find a quiet spot at the edge of a garden. Sit beneath a fig tree and close your eyes. The last sound you hear before drifting inward? A low stone bench beneath a fig tree, its leaves rustling like whispered secrets. You sink onto it, letting your back press into the sun-warmed stone. The day is dimming now, but the air holds the last of the heat, like a yawn that hasn't quite finished. To your left, another water jar. Of course. Its steady drip is now less a measurement and more a lullaby, coaxing the evening forward. You notice the jar is painted, faint traces of faded pigment, a moon, a series of stars, and a turtle moving, one assumes, extremely slowly toward the bottom. You watch the drip. Plunk. Pause. Plunk. And you wonder if Babylonian children ever stared at these things the way you might watch a loading screen. Waiting. Not impatiently, just waiting. A priest walks past, robes rustling, and mutters a greeting. He's older, his hair white like powdered gypsum, and he carries a small clay tablet under one arm. His destination is unclear, and his pace is nothing if not unhurried. You follow at a respectful distance, curiosity piqued, past sleepy goats and yawning dogs, until he stops before one of the temple's smaller annexes. There, in a room lined with tablets and shelves, he greets two other scribes who are deep in conversation, animated but not loud. Their discussion, you quickly realize, is about correction. Not punishment correction, mind you, calendar correction. You ease yourself onto a low bench by the door, pretending to study a crack in the wall while listening with half an ear. Apparently, the water clock they used last week, specifically the one for nighttime hour divisions, had a small chip in its drainage spout which made its flow just slightly too fast. A minor error, yes, but enough to nudge a few lunar predictions out of sync. They're debating whether it's worth amending the previous tablet entry or simply noting it in the margin. One of the scribes sighs. If we fix everything, we'll never sleep. The priest chuckles. Then we must decide which errors matter and which ones make us human. You sit with that for a moment. Not just the sentiment, but the reality of it. Time, in Babylon, is handmade. Imperfect. Always requiring adjustment. It's not a machine that you set and forget, it's a garden you keep tending. Prune a little here. Nudge a bit there. And so, water clocks get recalibrated. Shadows get remeasured. Stars are consulted not just for fate, but for feedback. In the ancient records, those cuneiform tablets stored with obsessive care in temple libraries, there are dozens of log entries for clepsydras. Some note that a jar was cracked or that the flow was irregular during cold mornings. Others record that a specific priest was consistently inattentive during hour turns, which sounds suspiciously like an ancient HR report. It's easy to romanticize ancient science as pure and wise, but here you see the other side, the sleepy scribe, the distracted apprentice, the chip jar no one replaced because it was still mostly working. And somehow that makes it all feel more real. More like something you could be part of. You wander through the archives, fingering the edges of stacked clay tablets. The scent here is something between rain-damp earth and baked bread, a mix of moisture and history. You find one tablet that seems personal, smaller, its symbols more casual. It's a kind of diary. The writer notes that the moon rose late, my wife burned the stew, and the neighbor's jar cracked from being left in the sun. You smile. A good day by Babylonian standards. Later that evening, you find yourself drawn to the river again. The banks are quieter now. The sun has fully set and the lamps cast halos in the haze. A group of children sits near the water's edge, one of them spinning a story while the others watch a clepsydra drain beside them. She's using it as a timer, letting each section of the story last until the water hits a new notch. And just when the lion was about to eat him, drip, the stars blinked and he vanished. They cheer. Someone throws a fig pit into the water. It's bedtime now for them and for many in the city. You hear shutters close, low lullabies hummed across alleys, the faint clink of water jars being brought inside. But you're still walking. The city by night is not asleep exactly, but hushed. A few priests still whisper prayers on rooftops, tracking the constellations. The last pulse of commerce slows to a heartbeat. And here and there, someone still watches ajar. There's one family still up, a woman, her sister, and two older sons gathered in a circle around a low lamp. They're comparing time markings on two different jars, one made by their grandfather, the other copied from a temple model. They argue gently, nudging reeds along the etched lines. The old jar was always too optimistic, says one son. Or maybe the new jar is lazy, says the other. They laugh, and the mother hushes them before the neighbors knock on the wall. You sit for a while outside their doorway, not intruding. Just listening to time debate itself. Somewhere, a jar overflows. No one rushes to fix it. And it dawns on you here, time doesn't punish. It waits. It forgives. It lets you sleep in if the bread is already baked. It's the kind of time you could get used to. The stars, ever patient, hang where they always do. You close your eyes and feel the city breathing. Moments later, you realize your eyes are lingering again on the water. The same slow rhythm. The jar isn't quite full, but it's close. You wonder, absurdly, if time feels heavier when the jar is full or when it's empty. Like a day you haven't yet lived versus one you just finished. Across the street, a gate creaks. Someone leaving home for a midnight temple shift, rubbing their eyes and clutching a small torch. It flickers in the breeze, casting long shadows over the wall, shadows that feel like the stretched hands of time itself, reaching lazily forward. You follow the path back toward the temple where the final time checks of the day are winding down. These were never rushed affairs. Even in urgent moments, the Babylonian relationship with time remains curiously gentle. Time was something you attended to, not something you outran. You overhear a scribe dictating a correction into fresh clay. The moon did not appear when expected. Possible haze. Our jars flowed 2 notches long. You can almost imagine this note being read again in 100 years by someone else trying to match their own jar's drips to the sky. There's a kind of humility in this system and understanding that even their finest measurements were always subject to the unpredictable whims of weather, human error, and cracked pottery. And still, they kept at it. Eventually, you find yourself once again in the temple's central courtyard where 3 clepsydras sit side by side on low plinths. One is nearly drained, the second half full, the third untouched, its lips still beaded with dew from the morning. They are named. Not poetically, but functionally: first night jar, midnight keeper, sunrise vessel. Each was calibrated for a different portion of the night, their flow adjusted for seasonal humidity, spout width, and the oddly poetic notion that nighttime hours ought to feel longer than daytime ones. You crouch beside the midnight keeper, watching its steady rhythm. Drip, drip. You begin to imagine a world where your own day is ruled not by beeps, buzzes, or glowing digital rectangles, but by water. Liquid time, smooth and soundful. Not a countdown, but a cadence. You picture yourself waking not to an alarm, but to the soft plunk of a jar's final drip, rising with the sun, eating with the shadows, and falling asleep as the last water drains away. Nearby, an apprentice stumbles out of a shadowy doorway carrying an armful of tiny pegs. He places them gently into a groove along the rim of one of the jars, setting tomorrow's time markers. It's an almost meditative task, done silently and with care. You watch fascinated as he tests the flow by letting a single drop fall. Then another. He adjusts the peg's placement with the tiniest nudge, as though it were a sacred act. In a way, it is. Every time adjustment here isn't just technical, it's spiritual. It acknowledges that the universe doesn't move perfectly, that even the stars are subject to wiggles and wobbles, and that it's okay to meet them where they are. The apprentice glances over and nods, inviting you closer. He points to the inside of the jar. Faint inscriptions line the walls like the rings of a tree, except these aren't age markers, they're intervals of the night. Names of hours. Some are named for stars. Others for gods. A few are just numbers. He taps one toward the bottom and says softly, "That's the hour of Enlil's dream." Then, more to himself than to you, "It always passes faster in the winter." You smile, not quite understanding but appreciating the poetry. In the distance, you hear the faint rustle of reeds and the chirp of a nighttime bird. The city is now in full slumber, the kind that hums rather than snores. Even the animals seem tuned to this rhythm. A dog lets out a sigh that seems timed to the drip. Somewhere behind a curtain, a baby murmurs as though synchronizing with the pulse of liquid time. You wander back toward your borrowed room, one of the guest alcoves on the temple's quieter side. A simple mat. A jar of cool water. A niche lamp already glowing low. Beside your mat is a small clepsydra, a travel-sized version still dripping from earlier. You sit and watch the last few drops fall. Drip. Drip. And with each drop, your mind slows. You think about all the generations who watched the same pattern. The astronomers adjusting predictions based on the moon's delay. The priests marking prayer hours. The mothers telling bedtime stories by the hourglass's sigh. Even the wandering goat herders tracking their return home by the jar's final gurgle. Time wasn't just kept here, it was shared. Passed from jar to jar, from person to person, from evening to morning. There is something deeply comforting in that. You lie down slowly, the mat firm but familiar. The ceiling above you is painted with stars. Realistic, almost obsessive in detail. You can't name a single one, but it doesn't matter. Your eyes drift to the side where the travel jar rests on a clay stand. It drips once more. And you let go. Later that night, or is it early morning, you find yourself drifting between thoughts, your mind still lapping like water against the smooth clay curves of those ancient jars. Sleep has come and gone in soft waves, each return sweeter than the last. You aren't fully awake, nor entirely dreaming. But something has shifted. You're now standing in a market, the same Babylonian streets, but with a golden haze that says this moment belongs more to memory than to reality. Morning is creeping into the alleys and the scent of baked barley and goat cheese flits gently through the air. You walk past a stall where a man is carving time notches into a fresh jar. The grooves are shallow but precise. A child beside him counts the lines out loud. You pause, watching her little finger dance down the jar's smooth curve like it's the most important thing she'll do today. And maybe it is. Behind them, a group of traveling traders are setting up their wagons. You overhear snatches of their talk, how long the journey to Susa will take, which stars to follow at dusk, when to rest so they reach the riverbank just as the full moon rises. Their plans aren't pinned to a calendar or scheduled by smartphone. They're listening to time itself. And somehow it's speaking in drips. You head down a quieter path toward the edge of the city where gardens begin to spill out, wheat and date palms soaking up the new sun. Here, nestled between a grove of fig trees, stands an old observatory tower. Stone steps. A soft creak in your knees as you climb. At the top, the view is wide and slow. Babylon wakes like a cat, stretching, yawning, entirely unconcerned with urgency. You can see temple spires, drying laundry, the curling smoke of morning fires. A city timed by sunlight and shadows, jars and stars, rather than bells or alarms. Next to you, someone sits cross-legged with a worn tablet in their lap. They don't speak, just nod in greeting. You both watch as the first bird crosses the horizon on time, you imagine, though by whose clock, you couldn't say. In the silence, your thoughts drift to what time felt like here, in this place that measured it so differently. Not a threat, but a rhythm. Not a command, but an invitation. The Babylonians didn't need to fight time or conquer it. They coaxed it, observed it, poured it gently into jars and let it flow, knowing full well they couldn't hold it still but could learn from how it moved. And somehow that was enough. You turn away from the view and take the long walk back down, each step a slow exhale. The market is beginning to fill. People gather not in haste, but in sequence. A kind of social choreography where everyone has time because everyone knows the time, not just in hours, but in feeling. Back at the temple, the apprentice is brushing dust from the base of the sunrise vessel. It's nearly full. He places a hand against it almost lovingly as if greeting an old friend. You sit nearby, not saying much. There's no need. Instead, you listen to the tiny, steady trickle of water inside. And with every drop, the idea becomes clearer. Time, when handled gently, becomes less a weight and more a companion. Less about chasing, more about noticing. A group of children race by, laughing as their feet slap the stones. One of them carries a miniature jar, likely for a school lesson on measurement. It wobbles dangerously. He doesn't care. You smile. The temple bells do not chime. There's no hourly announcement. Just the light, the wind, the drip. Eventually, as the sun climbs higher, you rise to leave. Your steps are unhurried. The street dust clings to your feet, warm and familiar. On your way out of the city, you pass a final carving old, nearly erased by time itself. It shows a hand tipping a jar, water flowing like a ribbon into the earth. Beneath it, a single line in faded cuneiform. You don't read the words, but somehow you understand what they mean. Something like, "Let the water fall and time will find you."